I think the younger generation is having to really navigate through these complexities and challenges, given the resources that they have access to them.
What is identity today? Because the way we interact with the society is through service or is through these touch points. Hey guys, I'm Janaiza Niazi, author of Navigating Service Design, and joining me is the incredible Sharan Lamdani. Together, we're on a mission to connect you with the brightest minds practicing service design. In today's musing, we have someone special. We have Arvind Lodaya. He's the principal and lead at ALO Consulting. He's a design professor and innovation strategist. His work spans across three sectors. In an academic space, he is a professor and he's also an advisor in multiple colleges. And as a practitioner, he works in the innovation space and he's very active in the social impact space. But the amount of things that he's done, I cannot essentially communicate that in this particular podcast. So you should go and check him out on LinkedIn because he's done quite a bit of things across different verticals. So thank you, Arvind, so much for joining and having this discussion with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I'm just going to jump into something that was very personal for me about services and why I got into the service industry. Because as a younger person, I've always interacted with people when I was accessing services, right? For example, I had a fisherman who used to come and sell fish at my doorstep, and we used to have a conversation on his fishing expedition, what was his rare catch. But today, when I have to buy fish, I just open my app and essentially place an order, and I've lost all those stories. So, I wanted to ask you from your experience, was there any service or anything that you had interacted very personally today it's digitized?
Pretty much everything, because I'm older than you, and things were even more human centric or social centric in those days, and very less technology in the picture. Then, as you said rightly, also that I mean, services were very much part of our life. We were, and more specifically, I want to add that they were part of our community. So it's not just that we were provided services by people, but those people were in our community. They were not from some other, planet. So the fishwala, as you said, or the dudhwala, or the cobbler, or the tailor, or the carpenter, these are all people who lived and worked close by. You could just kind of
Yeah.
walk across or run across to their shop and get the service done, or they would come over to your place. So they were all bhaiya, uncle, chacha, mausa, they were all in a sense family people. And
Yeah.
that was the context of service that I have grown up with. And perhaps if you read what I've written or I've shared online about my views on service, that's the part that I acutely feel I miss now. And I feel that along with that, we've seen a kind of decline in our social space, where we don't have these kind of community level relationships outside of our housing colony and so on. So it's again very homogeneous sets of people like ourselves, in our same income class, education class, even religion or caste class. So we don't really experience diversity to the extent that we did when I was growing up. So that gave me a very different image of an ideal society, of a good society, where there were lots of people who did different things, but they all somehow supplied to each other. They kind of depended on each other. So it was a sense of a much more localized economy. We didn't feel that we were part of a global economy, where I could purchase Apple products or apps from just by tapping on a screen or something like that. Everything was much more physical, much more material, much more in the local context, and that the whole mindset that it created was vastly different from what it is now. I'm not saying now is better or worse. It's very different. But one thing that I miss and I wish we could bring back into service design and service kind of planning is the community angle. Because I feel that one of the contributions of services, especially in a society like ours, which is a poorer country, and I think it applies to almost all poorer countries around the world, is that more than an economic function, it serves a social function. Services are, like I said, they are ways of people to connect with each other, to get to meet each other, to constantly interact with each other, to therefore learn about each other also. And that I think is crucial. Now, the opportunities for doing that in modern life, especially modern urban kind of life at the upper end of economic spectrum, we have such a limited exposure or view of the world. So we never really get to see the world in its full diversity.
No, that's a very valid point that you made, because a lot of the times I feel like stories are lost and you don't have to have a human interaction to get anything done. Because before we need to have that kind of a discussion or interaction, reach out to a person, ask a question. Today, if you want to find a route, you just use a Google map. I used to be so comfortable asking routes to a total
Correct.
stranger and asking them where to go, and they would even suggest new places to go in a space. Today, all of that is very digitized. So do you feel like in this digital service systems that we're in, we're losing out on stories, and the cultural aspect of it is completely being missed?
Even today, um, you still have services, you still have human contact, but the humanity has gone out of that contact. So today, if Flipkart or some delivery person comes from Swiggy to give me my food, it's a transactional thing. They just come with the box, and I don't even look at them in the eye sometimes, and they just hand me the thing, and they just want to get done and want to get a rating. Or that also doesn't happen anymore. Earlier they were still keen to get my 5-star rating or something. Now that doesn't seem to matter anyway. The point is that it has reduced that whole social interaction, uh, which earlier would have been much more richer and slightly drawn out. In other words, there would have been might have been a conversation. There might have been some kind of a little chit chat about the weather, or about where they're coming from, or what their current experiences and so on. That's completely wiped out. It's all very business-like. They are not interested. I'm not interested. Just give me the stuff, collect the payment or whatever it is, and just be done with it. So it's really shrunk that kind of interaction space, human interaction space, to the bare minimum. Where even if I would be actually thankful today, not thankful, but I would not mind it today if that human being was replaced by a drone, right? It makes no difference because it's just like a drone coming and delivering the box to my home. So what's the big deal? No, that's not right, right? We were building relations there. We were telling stories, as you said, about each other. They were also curious about us. What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today, etc. So there was that little kind of banter or chatter that happened, and at every point this would happen. And you can see that in the whole spectrum of a day, there were so many such touch points that you had, which were more than just a transactional point, give and take. But there was more engagement. There was more, concern and caring and empathy for each other. Uh, I find it interesting also. I don't know if you've seen Hindi cinema, but in so many Hindi movies, there is a kind of service provider character which comes up in different roles, in different personas. So the classical one, and this is from the black and white days, which continues till today, I guess, the family servant, the family retainer, right? So that person is the loyal servant who will stand up for the family's honor and pride, and in a kind of humility and all of that. But they are completely trustworthy, completely reliable, but they go through crises also of their own. Then there is the I don't know if you've seen a film called Bawarchi. So that's the cook, right? So you should see Bawarchi. It's got Rajesh Khanna in it, and he's this kind of a miracle worker. So there's a family that's slowly becoming dysfunctional. People are bickering and having fight with each other. It's a big joint family, and then he comes to the house, starts cooking for them, but he also kind of brings them all together, right? He makes them all appreciate each other a lot better. So the role of the service provider here is not just a transactional role, it's a social role, it's a community role, and they're truly providing service, right? So all these are service providers, and you can see how tightly they are integrated with the main characters, with the main personas of the films. And I think it's truly representative of what service actually stands for and could stand for in a social setting. If you just ignore for a moment the economic or the transactional setting, you can see that they are social agents, and they're playing really important roles in keeping society together and keeping the wheels, so to speak, rolling.
It's actually very interesting when the way you look at service is very people centric, and the way we're asked to design service is very digital touch point centric. So if you had to advise young service designers or designers to, when they're designing these services, how do we let these interactions happen, or let these cultural exchanges, stories happen? Because generally we are asked, are you moving the KPI? Are you impacting the business value? So at the end of the day, we are designing systems to move those business KPIs are not to create these interactions and these spaces for people to actually have this as a everyday service touch point that they are looking forward. So if you had to advise us, what should we be doing when we're designing these services so that this is not lost?
You're right. You're right, and I think the pressure comes from the business itself to kind of cut out any non-monetized kind of interaction at all. So why do you want to even waste time smiling at somebody because it's not going to earn you money, right? Just hand them the goods and collect the check and come back, and that's all your job should be. And that's really it's very sad that that's how business looks at a transaction today. Because I think, I would say at one level, business should also re look at itself as playing a social role and not just playing a kind of financial or an economic role. Um, Economics is a subset of humanity. It's not beyond or outside of humanity. That's important. But given the reality that we live in, and I'm sure that even a designer who's asked to kind of create a service journey for somebody may want to do these things, but will be discouraged. Will be kind of the supervisors or the managers will ask them to eliminate all such kind of non monetizable transactions and so on, and that's sad. So at one level, I would say that you should keep fighting for them as wherever you can, and really advocating the intangible value of human interaction. And I'm going to use the word intercourse as well, because that is what it is. It is social intercourse. Uh, but also, I think somewhere some of the metrics that you're talking about, satisfaction, fulfillment, etc., that you want to be evaluated by, I think there is a scope to show tangible results there. Because I've seen from my experience, and I'm sure your experience would be very similar, is that when you have a good human interaction in the context of a service transaction, you're actually left feeling good about that transaction. Your goodwill towards the brand and towards the product and towards the entire kind of transaction is much, much better than just the functional clinical one, right? So I think if you want that 5-star rating or if you want referrals, uh, it actually is a smart thing to add a little bit of this human touch in every interaction or touch point, um, because that is going to bring you those referrals, not just a fulfillment of a delivery of a good or service, right?
Yeah. So, have you seen changes in ownership models across the generations now? I think we have three different generations in this podcast
Right,
today.
right.
So, have you seen a change in the ownership models over time? Like, have you seen how different people are interacting with services and products?
So the from my childhood, the kind of model that existed for services was much more an integrated model, which is where the service was seen as a social function as well as a social duty almost. And I've said this elsewhere also, that the word for service in Indian languages, at least in the North Indian languages, is seva. And seva is also a very powerful religious and spiritual word. A lot of religious traditions, not just Indian, even Western religious traditions, they look at service, including Christianity, as a kind of service, as a way of attaining God, as a way of attaining spirit. So I think a lot of in that generation, the concept of service, of course, there was a business aspect to it, for sure, but that did not dominate the picture at all. I mean, everybody felt that they were doing this because they wanted to be helpful, they wanted to be supportive, they wanted to make others' lives, improve others' lives, or change. So that was the motivational space where they came from, and that's why business didn't matter so much. In the sense, I remember that in my childhood, a lot of people quite happily extended credit. They would say, okay, you can pay me tomorrow. Okay, I don't need to, because the bigger picture was more visible and important to them than the transactional thing. At the end of the day, I have to tally my accounts and I have to show my boss the receipts that I've had or the revenues that I've had. That wasn't so important. But somewhere along the way, I think that is the thing that has started dominating more and more, and the social component has started diminishing more and more in a sense. And then with the technology-enabled transactional space that's come in now, that we are in the current mode, uh, I think um nobody thinks about service in that way anymore, as if it's playing a social function. They just look at it as a business model, and you just worked out all your kind of uh, left hand side and right hand side, and the two kind of balance out or even out. That's sufficient. And you want to, like I said earlier, you want to trim down anything that is superfluous, that is not really monetizable. So unless you can't see its value in terms of dollars and cents or rupees and paisa, you just want to knock it off the picture. You say, why do that, right? So everything is now weighed or measured in terms of revenue potential or monetizable potential. And I think we've gone a little too far in that direction, because there are many intangible aspects, like we talked about these, the behavioral aspect, the cultural aspect, the largest. And there's a word that I want to introduce here called social capital. And this is something that is very important. So capital is not only financial or economic. There's social capital, there's cultural capital, there's environmental capital. These are all other kinds of capital that we also need to increase in order to thrive as a species on this planet. And one of the things that services can do wonderfully well, much better than products or anything else can do, is also increase social capital. And I think, and by the way, it can also increase environmental capital, because, and we can come to that later, because services allow for a sharing economy as opposed to an ownership economy. So that's another story that we can get into. But right now, let's suffice it to say that the social capital contribution of service is highly, highly undervalued and underexploited. And I'm hoping that today's entrepreneurs, or the coming generation of entrepreneurs who want to innovate in service business models, will actually revive this and bring it back in something.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen any data points or KPIs that could help us push these social capital aspect of designing
The
services?
only ones I've seen, like I mentioned earlier, is the kind of user satisfaction index. That's the kind of rating that it's not exactly here, but it allows, it can be adapted to include those factors as well. Because satisfaction comes from many sources, not just the material. So yes, you've supplied me with the T-shirt that I ordered. So my satisfaction is not just with the T-shirt. Remember, it's with the entire experience. So the moment we have any kind of metric or KPI that is related to overall experience, quality of experience, then that metric can lend itself to these kind of inputs as well. So if we build in more and more, I mean, one of the biggest um, grouses that anybody today would have, including you, I'm sure, is the after sales scenario, right? That's where service really matters. If you want to follow up, or if you want to change something, or if you're unhappy with your purchase and you go back to the customer service and you call them up and say, hey, I've got a problem. So I think there's a lot of untapped metrics there, in terms of goodwill, in terms of referrals, in terms of overall satisfaction of the entire experience over a long period of time, not just from point of purchase to point of delivery. But if you go beyond the experience, beyond that, after delivery and before purchase, then maybe the KPIs are waiting to be discovered and factored in, and some kind of better KPI needs to be generated, which maps this entire experience journey.
So, do you think the emphasis that businesses put on brands sort of don't leave enough space for these social interactions to happen? Like, I'll tell you where I'm coming from. At Calculain, we were trying to redesign the try at home service, right? And often, the WhatsApp messages that a consultant would send across was not on brand in terms of, the communication, the tone, um, just the vocabulary they were using, and then we would give them templates of these messages for them to forward it, right? So that's where we're sort of not leaving room for that interaction to happen, because we just didn't feel that it was on brand. The brand should communicate a certain way, and the consultant wasn't able to do so. So how do you
Yeah,
balance, upholding a certain image for a brand while making these spaces for interactions to happen?
absolutely. In fact, one of the earliest pieces that I wrote in my writing career was like speculating on the future of brands. That and the point that I made then was that, given the kind of change of our social structure and social family structures, in other words, we're all becoming more and more nuclear families, and even within nuclear families, we are becoming more and more independent people. So, young people have their own room, older people have their own room, grandparents are somewhere else. and young people go out the moment they reach college life, then they start their own life. So it's becoming more fragmented in a way. Uh, and I and what is going to hold society or community together? One of the things that I proposed at that time was that brands could step in and fill this role, because we need some kind of an emotional anchor to align ourselves with, to belong to. And traditional structures of belonging, whether the community or caste or nationality or whatever it might be, are becoming weaker thanks to technology, thanks to globalization, internet, communication, and all of that. So we need new places where people can converge and belong. And brands could provide that kind of an opportunity. In some way, you could say that brands like Nike or Apple are doing that now. They've become like cults in a sense. The followers or buyers of those brands are now loyalists. They say, I just go for Nike, I just go for Apple. Nothing else will do for me. So in a way, there are new kind of constellations of social glue, of social adherence. That was the point that I was thinking of when you mentioned about brands. My experience of brands in the context that you mentioned is that brands require investment, and they require a lot of effort. It's like a relationship. Similarly, brands should also review their investment strategy and not focus all their efforts and expenses and money and resources only on capturing the customer, which is what they currently do. Retaining the customer, making them kind of advocates of the brand or loyalists of the brand, is actually the real goal, is the real destination. And keeping them there, you want a long-term relationship with the customer so that they become the champions or they become the ambassadors of your brand, rather than you having to do much promotion and publicity. And for that, you have to really treat the customers very, very well, and in a very one is to one, in a very unique kind of a way. You can't apply templates, because each person thinks and feels that they are unique, that their problem or their situation is unique, and an automated response can never satisfy you as much as having a smart, intelligent, sensitive human being at the other end responding to you and giving you kind of visual feedback as well. I mean, just the fact that if I'm expressing myself to a customer agent, the fact that they're looking into my eyes and sort of giving me acknowledgement, saying, yes, I'm hearing you, I'm seeing you, I acknowledge you, that is such a powerful validation for me in that moment, rather than speaking to an automated
Right.
voice agent or something, right? So I think brands
Yeah.
need to put in a lot more effort to really keep this human level of interaction sustained, especially after the purchase is over. Because if you notice, the investment is very much there on the pre-purchase side, right? Before the purchase is done, a lot of people will come. So that, I think, is a not a smart strategy on behalf of the brands. The real effort happens after you get the customer. That's when you have to keep them really feeling that they are being serviced very well, and they don't want to ever change this again. I don't know if that answers your question specifically.
Yeah, but it did. And in your conversation, you also mentioned fragmentation of the society, right? Even at a family level. And that's something that I've been trying to understand. So, my
Yeah.
theory is that the gap that I feel with a cousin or a sister who is older, like the same gap, 5 years, I still can relate to her in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. But the gap that I feel with the younger
Yeah.
generation now, the same 5 year span, the span, it
Yeah.
feels much larger. My hypothesis is that the shift that came between me and the younger generation is that they had access to Instagram, Netflix, a lot of global content. There was last mile delivery available, right? And all of that
Yes.
sort of brings about a shift in behavior. It could be to do with patience levels. It could be to do with just the lack of belonging they have to the local community and more to the global community. So it's just sometimes
Yes.
it just feels like they're in their own bubble and not grounded in what's real right now in India in this scenario and situation. So I just wanted to understand
Absolutely.
what's your take on how it's gonna affect the coming generation, all of these services.
Right. I think you pretty much put your finger on the spot. Um, Except that I wouldn't attribute it to their intention. It's just what they have seen. It's just how the world has been presented to them when they were growing up and as they grow up, and they make the most sense of it as much as they can. They don't have the advantage or the references that you have had of 5 years of existence longer than they have. So they have not seen other things that you might have seen, and I have seen things that you have not seen. And I was just talking about it some time back. So
Right.
I've been raised in a much more socially kind of intensive context. So I've grown up with so many different kinds of personalities and relationships in my day-to-day life. To me, that is the normal. And then once that changes, then of course I feel the loss of that, and you're feeling that already in your kind of 5 year gap space. So that is something that's going to keep happening as I think life becomes more and more determined or driven by technology related mediated kind of platforms and so on. We are going to see some fundamental changes in society and culture taking place where culture will, as I see it, will become a lot more performative. In other words, my sense of cultural identity will have to be worn on the sleeve rather than being implied through my behavior and gestures. So if I wear a tilak here, or if I wear a kada here, or if I wear a chain with a cross here, those are the kind of markers of identity that I will have to wear to proclaim who I am and to feel that I belong as well. Uh, for my generation, that is not important because we've already grown up with these diverse cultural identities and so on, and we have learned to read the subtext and to figure out who's coming from where without needing those kind of obvious markers. Today, it's not so simple because everybody's wearing jeans, everybody's wearing those caps with the thing visor turned sideways. Everybody's wearing torn jackets or whatever it is. So, in one sense, the marker of identity has become so generalized, and not just even nationally, even internationally. You might find somebody from South Africa who look on the surface looks just like they could be from India. Uh, and equally, I mean, I remember because I spent part of my time in the US. So sometimes when we go shopping into a kind of store or whatever, we see sardars, meaning people with turbans and beards and all of that. But they're Americans. They're American Sikhs. Now all kinds of cross-cultural movements are happening as we speak, thanks to global access to media and content. Today, I'm not limited by my geography. I can sort of read up about some obscure Japanese lifestyle or practice or whatever it is and adopt it and implement it in my life. So no longer are these kind of the boundaries that currently, historically, kind of defined us for what we are. They are very, very thin now. They're very kind of fuzzy boundaries, all the more. And the reaction to that is to proclaim my boundary where it's not very clear. So the color of my skin, the kind of style of my clothing, the accessories that I wear or don't wear, all of these are now symbolic of what I stand for. And I do them very, very deliberately and intentionally. I think the younger generation is having to really navigate through these complexities and challenges, given the resources that they have access to.
So I just wanted to quickly understand. So when we are talking about how services are getting so standardized, what is identity today? Because people's understanding of the way we interact with the society is through service or is through these touch points, and this is how we engage with our environment as well. And that's how we also form our beliefs, our identities, our value system. So what is identity today, if you had to? Because I feel like we're all responsible for building that identity for others. So what is that today?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I must admit I've not thought about it very deeply. So I might end up being very superficial. But let me think on the fly. Um, I think identity today is a very complex construct. Not that it wasn't complex earlier; it was always complex. But earlier it was a lot more um, given. In other words, when I was growing up, or even before that, maybe when my parents were growing up, identity was given to you. It was given to you by virtue of your birth. Like, okay, I'm born in a whatever Gujarati Jain family, so I automatically inherit those qualities, right? And then I have an occupational identity generally. So in our Indian society, we have a kind of occupational system of, call it caste, call it whatever you want to call it, but we are the carpenters, or we are the artisans, or we are the baniyas, the kind of account keepers or bookkeepers, and so on and so forth, right? Historically, there are these kind of legacies that we have inherited. Again, we don't have to adhere to it, but that kind of shapes your identity, right? There are many other identity attributes that we now have. We also have a lot more freedom to choose our identity. when maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that freedom wasn't available to everybody. You have to be really, I think, very accomplished or very wealthy or influential or powerful to break out of your given identity and say, no, I'm not going to. But today we have gender, we have sexuality, we have political kind of ideology. Each of these are choices that young people make, and they may also change it as they grow older and older. So I think that fluidity or flexibility has increased considerably. So identity today is a much more, um, you know, multi kind of factorial process, and it keeps evolving as you go through life. It's not a fixed thing that was determined by your birth, that this is what you're going to remain all through your life. No, at every point you can keep reinventing yourself in some way. Uh, I have myself kind of, not by a deliberate intention, but my kind of professional identity is, as you outlined, it's a three-pronged identity, and I say I am equally a kind of professional consulting person. I'm equally an academic educator, and I'm equally a social activist. I sort of respond to social issues and concerns, and I want to be part of change in some sense. And all these three are sort of simultaneous. It's not either or. It's not saying I choose that, so I want to do that also, and this also, and this also. And how do I build my life in order to attain that kind of ideal for myself, or stay in that space? And sometimes I might change. I might say, okay, this academia is not really working for me. I find this a lot of waste of time and effort, and too much of talking and jargon. Let me switch back to something else. So I might do that as well at some point. So that flexibility still exists. So that's, I think, the larger picture of identity as I see it in our society today. In the context of services, I think services, well, the larger space of business is that a lot of our identity is influenced by is or shaped by consumption or consumer choices that we make. Which product, which brand, which fashion label, which kind of styling or whatever it is, right? So the consumer's aspect of our life, which is universal now, you can't escape it. You are a consumer whether you like it or not, is one key ingredient or factor of identity formation. And that can also change. I mean, if you become richer in life, you might change your brands, you might change your lifestyle preferences. If you become more politically aware, you might become more of a leftist thinker, and you might go away from so-called capitalist brands. If you become a kind of ecological activist, you get into green kind of ideology, you might start shunning, big oil and those kind of polluting or whatever unsustainable industry segments. You might start identifying with local enterprises or grassroots enterprises. So that's the kind of pathway that your identity is going to shape itself. So I think the opportunity for services and the challenge for services is to be firstly aware of which identity offering are they bringing to their chosen consumers. Like in addition to the actual transaction that you're doing, okay, I'm selling you a t-shirt. Okay, that's cool. But how does it kind of affect your identity? What kind of identity opportunity am I giving you by the purchase that you're making? And then we get joined into that kind of an identity transaction, because I'm a provider of that identity in a very small way, and you're a consumer of that identity in a very small way. So I think that perspective can really strengthen brands. And actually, I must tell you that one of my earliest ventures into consulting was in the realm of identity. Because my first job that I did with Ogilvy, where we actually ended up designing brands and corporate identity, was actually being like a counselor or a therapist for organizations which wanted to change their identity. So we had, let's say, ICICI Bank, which at that time was a public sector bank. You may not realize this, but ICICI was actually a government-owned bank at one point of time. And then at some point there was a policy decision taken to convert it into a private retail bank like it is today. So ICICI comes to the consulting firm and says, okay, we have decided from a strategic policy perspective that we want to switch from being a government kind of lending bank, which basically gives money to industry for expansion and growth and all that. Now we want to reach out to retail consumers and be like a regular bank. Now, give us a roadmap on this, and more importantly, give us an entire brand imagination of this. What should we look like? What should we sound like? How should we deal with our customers? What should our premises look like? And so on. So we did the entire kind of revamp of ICICI's corporate identity as we were working in Ogilvy. So to me, that whole experience and few such other experiences that we did in terms of revamping brand identity it led me to a personal space. Okay, as human beings also, we can do the same. I can reinvent myself. I can say, okay, I'm done with being my parents' child. I want to be myself. I want to be my own person. I want to proclaim to the world that this is me. And I'm no longer just defined by my surname, my birthplace, or my whatever, right? So I want to carve out my own niche in a way. That's a lot of people are doing that. They're kind of branding themselves now, independent of their legacy or of their inheritance. Some of them are using it. So let's say I have a very good friend who's an artist, but he often uses or draws on his Rajput background because it works for him to be a Rajput and to pitch himself as a kind of artist who comes from a Rajput background. That combination seems to work for him. Other people might deny it, especially people from the lower castes or classes who feel a little embarrassed about that kind of a background. But then, on the other hand, you also have I know of some writers and poets who come from the humblest of backgrounds, they're Dalits, and they want to proclaim the Dalitness. They don't want to hide the Dalitness. They're not ashamed of it anymore. They're saying, why should we apologize for what we are? And if you've seen some of their poetry, some of the Marathi Dalit poets, they create poetry which uses Dalit specific terms like piss and shit because that's what they deal with. That's what their caste identity is associated with. And they say, okay, we're going to put this in your face and make our poetry using, because these are the raw materials that society has assigned to us. So there's all kinds of radical and revolutionary things happening in that space. Again, the question is, how does a service entity fit into the scheme of things? And I think it's important for all brands to be very clear, to ask themselves constantly what their identity is, and also what their consumer's identity is, and figure out a way by which, how do we meet, how do we serve the consumer by giving them, imparting to them part of our identity and allowing them to be part of it. That perspective can actually help a lot in I think helping people both become freer and more expressive of their own identities, and also come up with options. You might have three restaurant brands, but each of them stands for a distinct positioning, right, in the consumer's mind. And it could be cultural, it could be economic, it could be, geographical, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, whatever. You could choose, and that's I think the job of the service brand is to be clear, to choose a positioning, and then offer that to the customers as a kind of way to connect and to create something together.
So, one last question that we had, because we've spoken about different touch points that's bringing a service together, that's shaping societies. And so, for young designers, Indian designers, and design communities, how can we use our skills to contributing to enhancing these services? Do you have any thoughts on how can we do
I,
this
I have
better?
I have a very simple mantra for this, and I really wish that people like it and they adopt it in their practice, which is humanize the touch point. Okay, so wherever possible, try and bring the human aspect, the human touch, the human element into that touch point. Create kind of real face-to-face contact, eye-to-eye contact. Bring in smiles. Bring in a little kind of conversation, like "How are you today?" Right? It doesn't really take up too much time or effort, but it adds so much quality to that experience, rather than a chatbot just saying, "What can I do for you?" Select the menu item that you want. And yeah, you're taking care of my functional need, but what about my emotional need, right? What about my human need? That you're taking away more and more the more you reduce that human element from my life. And we must remember that, like I said earlier, that businesses are also human enterprises. They're not machine enterprises. Machines are used by business, but all said and done, business is a human enterprise and it exists in a society. So business should also really not withdraw from the social space and leave it entirely to automation to take care of the business as usual, but try and wherever possible retain and actually grow the human interaction in the touch points.
I really hope we can do that. I hope we had design leaders who had your thought process, or stakeholders who are taking these decisions who had the
I
value
think
system with
I
which.
must say that I think I won't be very pessimistic about that. I think there are
Okay,
people, and I think because what
there
I'm
are.
saying is not rocket science. What I'm saying is not weird or freaky or some unusual thing. It's actually normal and natural for anybody. The moment you're a human being, you thrive on humanness. You thrive on human relations. That's what we are built for. That's what we
Yeah,
are wired for. If you look at neurologically,
yeah.
I mean, the kind of response that our brains have when we are engaging with a person as opposed to a chat bot. There's a world of a
Yeah.
difference. So there's more than enough evidence, and I think people would always agree with it. All they need is a kind of rational framework that somehow quantifies it for them. I think that's the missing link right now.
Yes.
That somehow there's
Yeah.
not enough quantification of this quality that we are talking about has been done to make it justifiable. I think the biggest fear that most business people and decision makers in business have is to do something that's not justifiable. They have a dreadful fear of that. What if I get caught out? What
Yeah.
if I make a mistake? What if my company goes down? And then people blame it on taking decisions that were not supported by evidence or by data points, as you say. And I think that's the little
Yeah.
gap that we have to overcome with a little
Yeah.
more faith in ourselves. I mean, we know the real answer. All of us know this inside of our hearts as to
Yeah.
what really matters to us in an interaction. And all we have to do is put more faith in that human instinct that we all have. And the justification will automatically come.
I'm not sure if putting a metric to this aspect will help, and I feel that's essentially, let's say for instance, at Swiggy, right, or even for us at Carrot Lane, there was a metric associated to it, right? The Net Promoter Score. So it's essentially, or the JC, the
Yeah.
jury consultants would be rated basis their
Yeah.
interaction with the customer, and the jury consultants, which were doing really good at conversions, when we would interview them, we'd know that they would call customers and call them to the store for coffee, and they naturally had that social aspect, which is why the conversions that they
Yes.
were doing were much higher, right? But when you rate JCs basis their interactions, it becomes really mechanical. Like I wouldn't want to speak nicely to somebody just to get that rating, right? Like that's just part of it. Just dehumanizes you if a certain interaction that you've had with a person is going to be rated. And I feel like even at Swiggy, right, your delivery guy, you rate them, but it ends up making them feel like a cog in the whole system and business and not humans. Like even the way they're treated, like there was this whole article on how their health insurance plans depends on their rating. So if you're rated high, you have you're eligible for a health insurance. If you're not, then you can go and die. So that's just very dehumanizing to put a metric to that aspect of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you actually again put your finger on a very important aspect of this issue, is that you can't be selectively human. You can't say that, okay, here I'll be human, the rest of it I'll be really clinical and cold-blooded. I'll be brutal. I'll be oppressive. I mean, then it doesn't all hold together, because being human automatically means being integrated. And I think the point is that in order to bring about good behavior and good feelings, you have to have the both sides really feeling good inside of themselves. So if as a Swiggy worker or whatever my role is, or somebody, a front office receptionist at a hotel, or a flight executive in an aircraft, these are all different service roles. If I'm not happy inside, if I'm not feeling contented, secure, protected, taken care of, then how can I care for somebody else? How can I be caring towards somebody else? How can I, if I'm stressed, if I'm anxious, if I'm insecure and angry inside my head, and let's say I'm a server in the airline on board the aircraft, and I see you having a bad day. Let's say you're traveling with your baby, and the baby is giving you a lot of trouble. What will my instinct be? Will I want to reach out and say, let me take care of that? No, I won't. I'll just sort of want to step away and avoid that, because you're adding to my stress. So stress is a very important factor in human relations. And unfortunately or fortunately, human beings are very finely wired to detect and sense stress and to respond to stress. It affects our entire mental model. It's been amply proved that the world looks and feels different, really, when you're stressed and when you're not stressed. Everything else remains the same. But if there's stress in my head, the entire scenario that I'm part of, this conversation that I'm part of, will have a very, very different color to it, will have a different flavor to it. As opposed to if I'm feeling joyful, if I'm feeling very good towards the world, then you'll see it reflected in my attitude towards everything. So it's important that's also part of the investment that needs to be made, to make sure that service agents are actually, they feel happy, they're feeling, motivated, they're feeling cared for and protected. Uh, that you can bet that that will actually reach out. And I've seen this a lot in the US, where it's a lot more customary there in the service industry for people to chat you up. So you go to a coffee shop or something like that, people say, so how's your day going? Right? Nobody asked you
Mhm.
to say this, but they do this anyway. And again,
Yeah.
it's a response to the kind of social isolation, in a sense, to give you that little point of human contact in a everyday life. And people wish each other, they say hi or good morning whenever they cross each other. So these are all kind of rituals and customs that have evolved in response to a kind of social challenge or a situation. We may not be in that space yet, but I think the principle still remains at the same place, is that if people are well taken care of, then they will in turn project it outwards. And I think for those people for whom attaining that level of service quality and service benchmarks are crucial, they have to put in that effort to make sure that all the people in their team are actually literally well taken care of. And I think a lot of people resort to automation when they realize that they can't do this. So it's like a cop out, saying,
Yeah.
okay, I know I should be like treating all these people nicely. It's like as a teacher, if I'm in a classroom and I say, okay, these, I'm in a bad way, I'm not doing well, or emotionally good health or whatever it is. I can't handle these 70, 80 young people, each of whom has a kind of some trauma, some crisis, something they're going through. I don't know how to deal with that. Let me just quickly, automate the process, right, and take the whole human aspect of it out of it. And that's really what is happening even in the business sector, even in the services sector, is that people are kind of shirking their responsibilities and the real core of what they should be doing, and delegating it to automated agents, but not realizing that the cost of that is not just a short term then and there. It's on a much larger scale, at a social scale. What is happening, if you add it all together, is that this whole humanity, the human centricity, or that we talk about, that's drastically coming down. We're having fewer and fewer such things. So my hope is that this is just a short-term kind of dip in the quality of services that we are looking at right now, because people are looking for short-term savings or cost benefits by avoiding human costs. And there's also the human variability, right? So the problem that a lot of businesses deal with is that today I'm in a good mood, but tomorrow I'm in a bad mood. Now, what if I put off some customers tomorrow when I'm in the bad mood? And therefore, a bot is much easier because it is standardized, and it deals
Yeah.
with everybody the same way. What if I have a prejudice or a bias? Suppose tomorrow I go and serve a customer who's dark skinned, and I have this kind of prejudice against dark skinned people, and that shows that customer is gone, they've lost forever, and the brand value has also crashed because of that. So they feel that human agents are more unreliable or unpredictable. Uh, but I
Yeah.
think that's not the case actually, because I think that if you proactively make the effort to make them feel supported and taken care of, then all human agents, barring maybe a odd pathological types who are quite rare actually, you will actually reap the benefits of extended goodwill and customer relations for sure.
This is a very valuable point because it's an entire topic on employee experience and back-end systems that you've opened up.
Correct.
Because right now we were just talking about front-end systems and customer-facing touchpoints, but there's an entire topic of employee experience and back-end systems that I generally work on, and I see how difficult it is to get changes
You
moving in
mentioned
that
something in
space.
your notes that you shared with me, is that especially in India, you see so many instances where there is an automated agent, like an ATM kiosk or whatever it is, but everybody goes to the human agent, right?
Right.
So I'll go to the
Yeah.
security guard whose job is not to actually be my service agent, but they are forced into that job, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, I prefer the human contact, and I trust the human contact a lot more than I trust a machine. And I'm, in
True.
fact, I have a fear of the machine, that what if it eats up my card? What if it steals my data? Right? There are so many of these fears that are not expressed. And again, that's the problem. They're not measured, they're not documented. And that's why, on the face of it, it looks like that the machine interface is a lot more efficient. But in fact, it is not.
True. True. If somebody had to reach out to you and chat with you more, is LinkedIn is the best channel to reach out to you, or how are you available somewhere offline for a coffee chat so that it's not digital touch point anymore?
I prefer, if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they should find me on LinkedIn and just pop me a message or send me a connection request. The only qualification that I ask is that if you send me a connection request, add a note on why you want to connect with me. I don't want just some random person who I cannot place in my life sending me a connection request. You are most likely going to be ignored in that case. So just add a little note saying, I heard you on this, or I read about you, or I know you from so and so, or I would like to know you because of this. Any one note is fine, and I'll happily accept.
So
Yes.
thank you so much for having this discussion with us and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, both of you. It was a pleasure. I
Thank
really
you
enjoyed
so
the
much.
conversation. I had no idea
Same.
how it was going to go, but I thoroughly enjoyed it.